He leaned in and whispered, "Try not to embarrass me. These people are way above your level." I didn't say a word. I just walked in beside him. But when the host rushed over, shook my hand and said, "We've all been waiting to meet you," his face went pale so fast it was almost satisfying. For 3 weeks, my husband coached me on how not to embarrass him. "Make sure you get your hair done professionally," he said, like I was incapable of grooming myself. "Buy a new dress, something elegant but not too flashy," he instructed, like I didn't understand formal events. "Just smile and let me handle the conversations," he reminded me the night before, like I was too unsophisticated to speak to successful people. I listened to every condescending comment, nodded through every patronizing suggestion. Let him believe I needed his guidance to navigate a world that was way above my level. The whole time I was working on the building where this exclusive dinner would be held. The historic estate I'd been restoring for over a year. The project that would win me a regional preservation award. The whole time the host of this dinner, the venture capital titan Christopher, was desperate to impress, was calling me for project updates and texting me photos of antique fixtures he'd found. But Christopher never asked about my work. Never bothered to learn what I actually did. Never connected the dots. So when we walked into that estate and everything he thought he knew about his wife collapsed in seconds, I can't say I felt bad about it. My name is Natalie. This is the story of how I let my husband underestimate me, and how it cost him everything. I'm 34 years old and I've spent the last 15 years becoming someone my own husband never bothered to know. I'm a historic preservation architect. That's not the same as a regular architect, though most people don't understand the difference. I don't design new buildings or suburban developments. I save structures that everyone else has written off as lost causes. Century-old factories that become luxury lofts. Abandoned theaters transformed into cultural centers. Landmark properties with foundation issues, failing infrastructure, and historical designations so restrictive that most architects won't touch them. That's my specialty, the impossible projects that require engineering expertise, historical knowledge, and the kind of stubborn determination that doesn't quit when things get complicated. Last year my firm brought in $3.2 million in revenue. We've been featured in Architectural Digest twice. I have a regional preservation award on my office shelf and a national recognition from the Historic Preservation Foundation. 3 years ago, I gave a keynote speech at a conference in Boston where 200 architects took notes while I explained adaptive reuse strategies for mid-century industrial buildings. But you'd never know any of that by looking at me on a Tuesday morning. I show up to construction sites in steel-toed boots and Carhartt work pants. My hair is usually pulled back in whatever messy bun I can manage before my first cup of coffee. I drive a Honda CR-V that's sensible and completely unglamorous, with mud on the floor mats and blueprints perpetually rolled up in the back seat. I don't wear designer clothes to job sites because designer clothes don't survive concrete dust and paint splatter. My hands have calluses from handling materials, and I keep my nails short because long nails are a liability when you're climbing scaffolding to inspect original plasterwork. To most people, and definitely to my husband, I look like someone still working their way up, not someone who's already arrived. Christopher and I met 3 years ago at a friend's wedding. He was a financial analyst at a mid-tier investment firm. Good salary, respectable position, clear ambitions about making partner within 5 years. When we started talking at the reception, I found him attractive in that polished way some men have. Everything about him was carefully put together. Tailored suit that fit perfectly. Expensive watch that caught the light when he gestured. The kind of easy confidence that comes from a life where doors have always opened. He asked about my work and I told him about a theater restoration I was finishing. He seemed interested, asked follow-up questions, laughed at my stories about discovering original murals hidden under decades of drywall. We exchanged numbers. Started dating. Within 6 months he'd moved into my house. The house I'd bought as a foreclosure 5 years earlier and spent 2 years renovating myself. The craftsman-style place with original hardwood floors I'd restored and built-in cabinetry I'd painstakingly stripped of paint to reveal the wood grain underneath. Christopher loved that house. He loved telling people about the great deal we'd gotten on it, though he never mentioned that I'd done the work myself or that I'd bought it years before we met. At first, our relationship felt balanced. We both had demanding careers. We'd meet for dinner and talk about our days. Or at least he'd talk about his days. The clients he was pursuing, the financial structures he was building, the office politics he was navigating. I'd listen, ask questions, offer support when he needed it. Looking back now, I realize how rarely the conversation went the other way. When I talked about projects, his attention would drift. He'd nod at the right moments, but I could see his eyes glaze over slightly. If I got excited about solving a structural problem or tracking down a source for period-appropriate materials, he'd smile indulgently, the way you might smile at a child showing you their crayon drawing. He complimented my appearance regularly. Told me I was beautiful, especially when I dressed up for his company events. But alongside those compliments came suggestions. Small things at first. Maybe wear heels instead of flats next time. Have you thought about a different hairstyle? That dress is nice, but something with a recognizable label might make a better impression. I told myself he was being helpful. That he understood professional image better than I did, coming from the corporate world where appearance mattered. That relationships required compromise, required adjusting to each other's needs and expectations. The comments escalated gradually enough that I didn't see the pattern forming. You work too much, he'd say when I brought blueprints home on weekends. Can't your team handle some of this? Do you really need to be at every site visit? Or, maybe it's time to upgrade your wardrobe. You can't show up to important events looking like you just left a construction site. Or delivered one evening when I came home exhausted after a 14-hour day managing a crisis with a failing subcontractor. I know your buildings are important to you, but eventually you have to think about our future together, not just your projects. Our future. Like my career wasn't part of that equation. Like the work I'd built over 15 years was some separate hobby that existed outside the life we were supposed to be creating. I started noticing other things too. How he'd introduce me at his company events. This is my wife, Natalie. She's an architect. Said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, followed quickly by pivoting the conversation back to his own work. How he'd check his phone whenever I talked about a project achievement. How he never came to my job sites, never attended my industry events, never asked to see the buildings I'd saved. 6 weeks ago, everything came to a head with a single invitation. Christopher came home one evening practically vibrating with excitement. He was holding a cream-colored envelope, the expensive kind with embossed lettering that announces its importance before you even open it. James Whitmore is hosting a private dinner, he said, staring at the card like it was a lottery ticket. At the Whitmore estate. Black tie. Only 12 people and their spouses invited. I kept slicing vegetables for dinner, letting him have his moment. This is huge. Nat James Whitmore controls half the commercial real estate development in this entire city. He doesn't do dinners like this often. If I can make the right impression. He paused, looked at me with this mix of hope and concern. I was thinking you could come with me. As my date. The phrasing struck me immediately. Not, will you come with me, or, I'd love to have you there. But you could come with me. Like he was extending an invitation to something I might not be qualified for. Like he wasn't entirely sure I'd fit but felt obligated to ask anyway. Of course, I said. When is it? 3 weeks from Saturday. 3 weeks. That gave him plenty of time to prepare. And apparently plenty of time to prepare me too. The coaching started the next day. Little comments woven into regular conversation. Reminders that escalated into instructions. By the end of the first week, he'd created an entire strategy for how I should present myself. Make sure you schedule a hair appointment for that Friday, he said over breakfast one morning. Professional styling. None of that messy bun thing you usually do. I looked up from my coffee. My hair is fine, Christopher. For work sites, sure. But this is different. These are extremely successful people. First impressions matter. A few days later, I was thinking you should buy a new dress for the dinner. Something elegant but not too flashy. But, sophisticated. I have dresses. I know, but this is a really important event. Maybe something with a designer label? Something that looks expensive. The night before the dinner, he sat me down for what he called a game plan discussion. Listen, Nat, I need you to understand how significant this is. James Whitmore could open doors for me that I've been trying to get through for years. The people at this dinner are way out of our league right now. So tomorrow night just follow my lead, okay? Smile, be pleasant, but let me handle most of the conversations. These people can be judgmental about careers and backgrounds. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I nodded. Said okay. Let him think I needed his protection from a world I supposedly didn't understand. The whole time I was biting back the truth. The Whitmore estate he kept talking about? I'd been working on it for 14 months. James Whitmore III had hired my firm to transform his family's 1890s Georgian mansion into a luxury event venue while maintaining its historical designation. It was one of the most complex projects of my career. Navigating preservation codes, upgrading electrical and HVAC systems without damaging original plasterwork, designing modern amenities that didn't compromise the building's architectural integrity. James and I had spent hours together. Weekly planning sessions in his study. Site walks where we discussed structural challenges and design solutions. Late-night phone calls when permit issues threatened timelines. He respected my expertise, valued my input, trusted me with his family's legacy property. He had my cell number saved in his phone. We texted regularly about antique lighting fixtures and period-appropriate materials. Just that morning he'd sent me a photo of bronze door handles he'd found at an estate sale, asking if they'd work for the carriage house entrance. I'd mentioned the Whitmore project to Christopher exactly twice. Once when I first landed the contract, told him over dinner that I'd been hired for a major estate restoration. He'd said, "That's great, babe," and gone back to scrolling through his phone. The second time was about 6 months ago when I explained I'd be working late for several weeks because we were in a critical phase of construction. "Okay, just don't forget we have that thing with my boss on the 15th, he'd replied. He never asked the client's name. Never inquired about the project scope. Never bothered to connect the dots between estate restoration and the Whitmore estate dinner invitation sitting on our counter. Why would he? In his mind, I was just an architect doing architecture things. My work existed in some separate category that had nothing to do with his world of finance and important connections. So I let him coach me. Let him believe I needed his guidance. Let him think he was preparing me for an event I wasn't sophisticated enough to handle on my own. And I went to my hair appointment. Bought the elegant dress he'd suggested. Smiled when he approved of my appearance the night of the dinner. Because I knew something he didn't. In about 2 hours, my husband's entire understanding of who he'd married was going to crumble. Every assumption he'd made, every condescending comment he'd delivered, every time he'd treated my career like a cute hobby, all of it was about to be revealed for what it was. And I wasn't going to say a word to stop it. The morning after Christopher received that invitation, he started a spreadsheet. I found him at the kitchen table on Saturday, laptop open, notepad beside him, researching every name on the guest list like he was preparing for a military operation. He'd somehow gotten hold of the attendee information, probably called the event coordinator under some professional pretense, and was building dossiers on each couple who'd be there. Michael Patterson, founder of Patterson Capital, he muttered, typing notes. Net worth estimated at $200 million. Invested in the downtown revitalization project 3 years ago. He looked up at me. I need to find a way to mention that I follow commercial real estate trends. Make it seem natural, not forced. I poured myself coffee and watched him work. This was Christopher in his element. Strategizing, positioning, calculating exactly how to present himself for maximum impact. He'd always been like this about networking. Every introduction was an opportunity. Every conversation had an objective. What bothered me wasn't the preparation itself. It was how that preparation extended to managing me. You should probably avoid talking about construction work if it comes up, he said without looking away from his screen. These people might not understand the difference between what you do and regular contractors. Just keep it vague. Say you work in architecture and change the subject. I took a sip of coffee. Didn't respond. And definitely don't mention any project problems or difficulties, he continued. Successful people don't want to hear about struggles. They want to hear about wins. Confidence. You know. Right, I said. Confidence. Over the next 3 weeks, Christopher's obsession intensified. He bought a new suit, not because his current ones weren't adequate, but because this dinner required something special. He practiced his handshake in front of the bathroom mirror. I walked past one evening and heard him rehearsing conversation openers, testing different ways to introduce himself that sounded impressive but not arrogant. He made a reservation at the salon I occasionally used and told me the appointment was for the Friday before the dinner. Full styling, he said. Not just a trim. I want you to look polished. I can do my own hair, Christopher. I know you can. But this is important. These people notice details. Just trust me on this. The dress conversation happened during week 2. We were getting ready for bed when he brought it up, casual but clearly rehearsed. I was thinking you should buy something new to wear to the dinner. Something that really makes an impression. I glanced at him from where I was setting my alarm. I have plenty of dresses. I know, but this is different. This isn't a work event or a casual dinner. This is, he paused, choosing his words. This is the kind of event where people notice what you're wearing. Where labels matter. I'm not trying to be superficial, but that's just how these circles work. You want me to buy an expensive dress so I look like I belong. I want you to feel confident, he corrected, but we both knew what he really meant. There's a boutique downtown that carries elegant stuff. Classic, sophisticated. Nothing too flashy, just quality. Why don't you go this weekend? I went to the boutique. Bought a black dress that cost more than I'd normally spend but less than Christopher probably hoped. It was beautiful in an understated way. The kind of elegant that didn't scream for attention but wouldn't be overlooked either. When I showed him, he nodded approvingly. Perfect. Exactly right. Like I'd passed some test I hadn't realized I was taking. The instructions continued. Small comments woven into everyday conversations, each one reinforcing the same message. I needed to be managed, prepared, coached for an environment I wasn't naturally equipped to handle. Remember to smile, but not too much. You don't want to seem nervous or overeager. Let me introduce you to people. Don't just jump into conversations on your own. If someone asks what you do, keep it simple. Don't get into technical details that might bore them. Each comment landed like a small weight, accumulating into something heavier that settled in my chest. This was my husband. The man who'd stood across from me 3 years ago and promised to honor and respect me. And he was treating me like a liability that required damage control. I didn't argue with him. Didn't defend myself or push back. I just absorbed each instruction with a calm that surprised even me. Maybe part of me wanted to see how far he'd take it. How completely he'd reveal what he actually thought of me when the stakes felt high enough. The worst part was realizing how long this had been building. The comments about my appearance, the dismissal of my work, the way he'd position himself as the successful one in our relationship. It had all been there from the beginning. I'd just been too willing to interpret it as care rather than condescension. Wednesday before the dinner, Christopher came home with a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, something sparkly and expensive looking. I thought you could wear this Saturday, he said, watching my reaction. It's elegant. 5. Exactly the kind of thing that fits the event. It's beautiful. Thank you. I just want you to feel comfortable. To fit in. He kissed my forehead. I know this world isn't really your scene, but you'll do great. Just follow my lead and everything will be fine. Your scene. Like the world of successful people having dinner together was something foreign to me. Something I'd need his guidance to navigate safely. I wondered if he'd feel differently if he knew I'd spent that afternoon on a conference call with James Whitmore and the Historical Preservation Board, discussing the final inspection approval for the estate's ballroom restoration. If he knew that James had ended the call by saying, "I can't wait for everyone to see what you've accomplished here, Natalie. This building is going to be the talk of the city." But Christopher hadn't asked about my day. Hadn't asked about my work in weeks, actually. He was too focused on his own preparation, his own opportunity, his own carefully constructed plan for advancement. Friday evening, the night before the dinner, Christopher called what he described as a final briefing. We sat in the living room after dinner and he walked me through his strategy like a coach reviewing plays before the big game. James Whitmore is the priority, obviously, but don't ignore the other guests. Michael Patterson and his wife, Victoria, are major players. Thomas Chin runs the biggest development firm in the state. Rebecca Hartford sits on every important board in the city. He looked at me seriously. These people are way out of our league right now, Nat. I'm not saying that to be mean, I'm saying it so you understand the stakes. One wrong impression and doors close. One good impression and doors open. I understand. Do you? He leaned forward. Because these people can be judgmental. They care about pedigree, about connections, about presentation. They're going to look at us and make assessments in the first 30 seconds. So tomorrow night, I need you to just smile, be pleasant, and let me handle the substantive conversations. Can you do that for me? The question hung in the air between us. Can you do that for me? Like staying silent and decorative was a favor I'd be doing him. Like my own thoughts and expertise and professional credibility were things that needed to be hidden away for his benefit. Yes, I said. I can do that. He relaxed, smiled, reached over to squeeze my hand. Thank you. I know I've been intense about this, but it's only because I care about our future. About building something bigger than what we have now. Our future. He kept using that phrase, but it was becoming increasingly clear that our future looked a lot like his future with me as a supporting player. That night, lying in bed next to my sleeping husband, I thought about all the ways I'd made myself smaller over the past 3 years. All the times I'd downplayed my achievements or stayed quiet about my success. All the moments I'd let him believe his career was the one that mattered, that my work was just something I did to stay busy. I thought about the Whitmore estate, about the 14 months I'd spent transforming a deteriorating mansion into something extraordinary. About the original crown molding I'd painstakingly restored, matching plaster composition from the 1890s. About the marble floors we'd uncovered and cleaned, revealing patterns that hadn't been seen in decades. About the chandelier I'd sourced from an architectural salvage auction in Philadelphia, spending weeks having it rewired and restored to its original glory. I thought about James Whitmore telling me last week that this project had exceeded every expectation, that he'd already received offers from 3 couples who wanted to book the venue for events before it was even officially open. And I thought about my husband sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware that tomorrow night he was walking into a building I'd saved, to meet people who already knew my name, for a dinner where I was the one they'd actually been waiting to meet. The irony was almost poetic. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made everything feel slightly surreal. Clear sky, comfortable temperature, golden light that made the city look like it was posing for photographs. Christopher spent the afternoon getting ready with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for job interviews or marriage proposals. His new suit fit perfectly. His shoes were polished to a reflective shine. Even his hair looked professionally styled, though I knew he'd spent 40 minutes in the bathroom achieving what he wanted to pass off as effortless. I got ready more quietly. The salon appointment had gone well. My hair looked elegant without being overdone. The black dress fit exactly right. The bracelet Christopher had given me caught the light when I moved. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged at an exclusive dinner. Someone who looked successful, polished, confident. Someone my husband still thought needed his protection from her own inadequacy. We drove to the estate in Christopher's car. He was too nervous to let me drive, needed the control of being behind the wheel. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He kept taking deep breaths, the kind you take when you're trying to calm anxiety that won't quite settle. "You look beautiful," he said as we got closer. "Really beautiful. You're going to make a great impression." "Thank you. Just remember everything we talked about, okay? Smile, be warm, but let me lead the conversations. These people are extremely influential. We only get one shot at this." We pulled up to the estate's entrance and I felt Christopher's energy shift into something almost electric. This was it. His moment. The opportunity he'd been building toward. The building looked stunning. The exterior lighting I'd personally selected highlighted the restored limestone facade. The original bronze doors gleamed from months of careful restoration. The garden pathway was lined with period-appropriate lanterns that created a warm, welcoming glow. All of it, every detail had been specified, sourced, and approved by me. Christopher parked, turned off the engine and sat for a moment collecting himself. Then he turned to me with that expression I'd come to recognize over the past 3 weeks. Serious. Paternal. Vaguely condescending. "Listen, Nat. I need you to understand how important tonight is. These people are extremely influential. James Whitmore alone could change the entire trajectory of my career." He reached over and took my hand, squeezing it firmly, not affectionately but like he was trying to make sure I was paying attention. "So please just try not to embarrass me tonight. These people are way above your level. Way above mine too, honestly. But I'm trying to get us there. So just follow my lead. Smile. Be pleasant. Let me do the talking." "Okay." I looked at my husband. Really looked at him. Saw a man who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for an evening he thought would define him. A man who'd coached and managed and instructed his wife because he genuinely believed she wasn't capable of navigating this world on her own. A man who had absolutely no idea who he'd married. "Okay," I said quietly. And I meant it. I would let him walk into that building. Let him try to impress the host who already had my number in his phone. Let him attempt to network with people who'd specifically asked to meet me. I would let him see finally and completely exactly who I was. We got out of the car and walked toward the entrance together. We walked into the foyer and I felt Christopher's anxiety radiating beside me like heat. The space took my breath away even though I'd seen it hundreds of times during construction. But seeing it transformed for this evening, lit perfectly, styled beautifully, filled with elegantly dressed people, made all those months of painstaking work feel suddenly powerfully real. The crown molding I'd spent weeks matching to the original 1890s plasterwork caught the warm glow from the chandelier. The marble floors we'd uncovered beneath layers of cheap linoleum gleamed under carefully placed lighting. Every detail I'd agonized over, every decision I'd defended to contractors who wanted to take shortcuts, every hour I'd spent researching period-appropriate materials, it was all here, completed, perfect. Christopher didn't notice any of it. He was too busy scanning faces, trying to identify the important people he'd researched, calculating his approach. I could practically see his mental checklist running. Who to talk to first, what to say, how to position himself. About a dozen people were already mingling near the curved staircase, holding cocktails, chatting in that practiced way wealthy people have of looking relaxed while constantly assessing everyone around them. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The men had that casual confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Christopher straightened his shoulders, preparing himself. He took a breath like someone about to dive into deep water. Then James Whitmore spotted me from across the room. I saw the moment it happened. James had been talking to an older couple near the fireplace when his eyes swept the foyer and landed on me. His face transformed, genuine warmth, the kind of smile you can't fake. He immediately excused himself and started walking toward us. Toward me. Christopher saw him coming and his entire body shifted into performance mode. He adjusted his posture, prepared his handshake, positioned himself slightly forward like he was ready to make the introduction that would launch this entire evening. I watched him rehearse his opening line silently, lips barely moving. The greeting he'd practiced in our bathroom mirror for 3 weeks. James walked right past him. Didn't even glance in his direction. Just came straight to me with both hands extended, taking mine in that warm, familiar way we'd greeted each other dozens of times over the past 14 months. Natalie. Finally. His voice carried across the foyer, loud enough that several conversations paused. I've been telling everyone you'd be here tonight. We've all been waiting to meet you. The look on Christopher's face was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Pure confusion first, like his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. His rehearsed greeting died on his lips. His extended hand hung in the air, ignored. Then recognition started to creep in. The way James said my name. The familiarity in his greeting. The phrase, "We've all been waiting to meet you." Then horror. Absolute, crushing horror as the pieces started connecting in ways that didn't match anything he'd expected. "Good to see you, James," I said, squeezing his hands warmly. "See me? You're practically the reason we're having this dinner in this space." James gestured around the foyer with obvious pride. "I wanted everyone to experience what you created here. Every person in this room has asked me for your contact information." He finally glanced at Christopher, who looked like he'd been physically struck. "And you must be Christopher. Natalie's husband. She's mentioned you." Christopher made a sound that might have been words if his vocal cords were functioning properly. His face had gone pale. I watched him try to smile, try to extend his hand for that handshake he'd planned, but everything about him had short-circuited. "Natalie and I have been working together for over a year now," James continued pleasantly, like he didn't notice Christopher's distress. "Transforming this place was a nightmare before she came along. 3 other architects told me it couldn't be done. Code issues, structural problems, historical designation restrictions that would have made most people quit. But Natalie figured out how to honor the building's history while making it functional for modern use. Brilliant work." Architect," Christopher finally managed. "Historic preservation architect," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." James laughed. "Oh, don't be modest. You saved this building. And you did it on time and under budget, which frankly is a miracle in this industry." He turned back to Christopher and I saw something calculating in his expression, like he'd already sized up exactly what kind of man my husband was. You must be incredibly proud. Not many people can do what Natalie does. It requires expertise in architecture, engineering, history, construction management, and navigating bureaucratic nightmares that would make most people walk away. Christopher's mouth opened, closed. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Now, James said, linking his arm through mine with easy familiarity, I absolutely must introduce you to some people who've been eager to meet you. Michael Chin is considering converting an old textile mill into residential lofts and specifically asked to speak with you tonight. And Rebecca Hartford wants to discuss that theater restoration you did in Louisville. She's been trying to find the right architect for a similar project. He glanced back at Christopher almost as an afterthought. You don't mind if I steal her for a bit, do you? Professional talk and all that. No. That's... Christopher couldn't form a complete sentence. James led me away into the main reception room, and I didn't look back at my husband standing alone in the foyer I'd designed, looking like his entire understanding of reality had just shattered. The next hour and a half were surreal in the best possible way. James introduced me to every influential person at that dinner. Michael Chin, the developer with the textile mill project, who spent 20 minutes asking detailed questions about adaptive reuse strategies and historic tax credit structures. Rebecca Hartford, who ran the largest historic preservation foundation in the state, who'd seen my theater restoration and wanted to discuss timelines and budgets for her own project. Thomas and Linda Patterson, who owned 3 historic properties downtown and were looking for an architect who understood the delicate balance between modernization and preservation. Victoria Ashford, whose family controlled one of the oldest buildings in the city and who'd been looking for someone to assess its structural integrity. Every conversation was professional, substantive, the kind of discussion I'd been having for 15 years. I talked about load-bearing walls and period-appropriate materials. Explained the process of working with historical commissions. Shared stories about discovering original features hidden behind decades of bad renovations. This was my world. Had been since before Christopher and I even met. The fact that he'd never known it existed told me everything I needed to know about our marriage. I spotted him several times throughout the evening, trying to insert himself into conversations, struggling to find his footing. Without the James Whitmore connection he'd been banking on, without me standing beside him as his entry point, he was just another financial analyst at a party full of people who controlled actual capital. He'd approach a group, introduce himself, try to steer the conversation toward investment opportunities or market trends. People were polite but disinterested. They'd nod, make vague acknowledging sounds, then turn back to their previous discussions. At one point I saw him corner one of the waiters complaining about something, probably the Scotch selection or the timing of the appetizers. The young man's face flushed, but he handled it professionally, the way service workers do when they're used to dealing with difficult guests. I'd seen Christopher treat staff that way before. Always found some small thing to criticize, some way to establish hierarchy. I told myself it was just him being particular about quality. Now I saw it for what it was. A man who needed to feel superior to anyone, and chose people who couldn't push back. About 90 minutes into the evening, James found me talking with the Pattersons about a potential hotel renovation and gently interrupted. Natalie, I hate to pull you away, but could I get your professional opinion on something? The audio system contractor for the ballroom sent over revised plans, and I think there might be an issue with how they're proposing to mount the speakers. I'm worried about the ceiling medallions. Of course. Let's take a look. We excused ourselves and walked through the main hall toward James's private study. As we passed the bar, I caught Christopher watching us, his expression unreadable but intense. James's study was exactly as I remembered from our planning sessions. Rich wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, large desk positioned to face the window overlooking the gardens. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. Before we discuss audio systems, he said, settling into his desk chair, I wanted to give you this. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $75,000. I stared at the number, then looked up at him in shock. James, this is your performance bonus for completing the project ahead of schedule and under budget, he said firmly. You earned every penny. This building should have taken 18 months minimum and cost close to $6 million. You did it in 14 months for 4.5. You've already paid for yourself 3 times over, and that's before we even factor in the increased property value. I don't know what to say, Say you'll accept it and stop being so modest about your achievements. He pulled out the audio system plans and spread them across the desk. Now about these speaker mounts. Am I right to be concerned about drilling into the original plaster around the medallions? We spent the next 20 minutes discussing the technical details. The kind of problem-solving conversation I genuinely loved. How to integrate modern audio without compromising historical elements. Whether wireless systems would work given the building's thick walls. The best way to conceal wiring without damaging original features. This was why I loved my work. Not the money or the recognition, though both were nice. But the challenge of solving puzzles that required both creative thinking and technical expertise. The satisfaction of preserving something beautiful while making it functional for modern needs. When we finally returned to the dinner party, I immediately spotted Christopher. He was standing alone near the bar, nursing what looked like his third or fourth drink, watching the room with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Anger mixed with humiliation, mixed with something that looked disturbingly like fear. Our eyes met across the space. For the first time in our 3-year relationship, he looked at me and saw someone he didn't recognize. Someone he'd completely underestimated. Someone he couldn't manage or control or dismiss. Someone who didn't need him at all. The realization was written plainly across his face, and despite everything, despite 3 weeks of condescension and 3 years of being treated like my achievements didn't matter, I felt a wave of sadness wash over the vindication. This was my husband. And he'd never actually known me. The car ride home was silent in a way that made the air feel dense and suffocating. Christopher gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white. His jaw was clenched tight enough that I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. He stared straight ahead at the road like he was trying to bore a hole through the windshield with sheer force of will. I looked out the passenger window at the passing streetlights, watching them blur into streaks of gold against the darkness. Each one we passed felt like a small measure of distance opening up between who I'd been an hour ago and who I was becoming. Something inside me had shifted during that dinner. Not broken exactly. More like settled into place after years of being slightly misaligned. 3 years of small dismissals and condescending comments. 3 years of being treated like an accessory rather than a partner. 3 years of watching my husband look past me while claiming to love me. It had all crystallized into something I couldn't unsee anymore. A clarity so sharp it cut. We turned onto our street and Christopher's breathing changed. Shorter, harder, like he was trying to control something that wanted to explode out of him. He pulled into our driveway. Put the car in park. The engine ticked in the sudden silence. Neither of us moved. Then Christopher's hands dropped from the steering wheel and he turned to face me, his expression somewhere between fury and devastation. You made me look like a complete fool tonight. His voice was low, controlled, but shaking at the edges. I turned to him slowly. Kept my own voice calm. How exactly did I do that? How did you? He stopped, took a breath, tried again. You knew James Whitmore. You've been working with him for over a year. You've been working on that entire estate. And you never thought to mention that to me. I did mention it. Twice. You weren't interested. His face flushed red. You said you were working on an estate renovation. You didn't say it was James Whitmore's estate. You didn't say you were some kind of award-winning preservation expert who everyone at that dinner wanted to meet. I'm not some kind of expert, Christopher. I felt exhausted suddenly. Bone-tired. I'm an architect who's been doing this work for 15 years. You just never bothered to ask what that actually meant. That's not fair. Isn't it? My voice rose slightly despite my efforts to stay level. When was the last time you asked me about a project? When was the last time you showed any interest in my work beyond whether it interfered with your schedule? I've always supported your career. You've tolerated it, I corrected. There's a difference. You tolerated my work as long as it didn't inconvenience you or make you look bad. But the second it became visible, the second other people saw what I actually do, you're angry. Not proud. Angry. Christopher's hands clenched into fists on his lap. You deliberately hid this from me. You let me walk into that dinner thinking I was bringing my wife to impress people, and instead you're the one everyone wanted to meet. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I didn't hide anything. I told you about the Whitmore project when I got the contract. I told you I'd be working late because we were in a critical phase. You just didn't listen because you didn't care. I care about you. You care about the version of me that fits into your life plan, I said. The version that shows up to your work events looking appropriately successful but not too successful. The version that supports your career without having one that might overshadow yours. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. That's not true. Then why did you spend 3 weeks coaching me on how not to embarrass you? Why did you tell me those people were above my level? Why did you treat me like a liability that needed to be managed? Because I was trying to help you. I didn't need help, Christopher. I needed a husband who respected me, who saw me, who bothered to know who I actually was instead of deciding who I should be. The words hung between us in the car and I watched him process them. Watched him cycle through justifications and defenses, searching for the angle that would make him right and me wrong. He couldn't find it. You should have told me, he said finally, quieter now. You should have told me you were working with James Whitmore. That you knew all those people. That you were, he struggled with the words. That you were more successful than I realized. Why? I asked. So you could take credit for my connections? So you could use my relationships to advance your own career? So you could stop being embarrassed by me and start being proud that you'd married well? That's not, I never said I was embarrassed by you. You didn't have to say it, Christopher. You showed it every single day. He opened his mouth to argue but nothing came out. For once in our entire relationship he had no response. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. Walked up to our house. My house, the one I'd bought and renovated years before I met him, and went inside. Christopher followed a few steps behind, his footsteps heavy on the porch. In the living room he finally found his voice again. I can't believe you're trying to make this my fault. You're the one who lied. I never lied, I said, turning to face him. Not once. I told you what I did for a living. I told you about my projects. You just never listened because my work wasn't important enough to you. And now you're angry because other people saw what you refused to see. That's not fair, Natalie. None of this is fair. But it's honest. And maybe that's what's really bothering you, that you can't spin this into a story where you're the victim and I'm the one who did something wrong. His face cycled through emotions. Anger, hurt, defensiveness, something that might have been shame. So what are you saying? That our entire marriage has been a lie. I'm saying I don't think you ever actually knew me. And I don't think you wanted to. The words came out quieter than I'd expected, but they landed hard. I could see them hit him, could see the realization starting to crack through his defenses. I walked upstairs to our bedroom and pulled my overnight bag from the closet. Started packing. Clothes, toiletries, the things I'd need for a few days away. Christopher appeared in the doorway, watching. What are you doing? I'm leaving for a while. I need space to think. You're leaving? Just like that. Just like that, I said, folding a shirt and placing it in the bag. I pulled out my phone and called Elena. She answered on the second ring. Hey, can I stay with you for a while? Always, she said without hesitation. What happened? I'll tell you when I get there. I'll make up the guest room. Drive safe. I ended the call and zipped the bag closed. When I turned around, Christopher was still standing in the doorway, looking lost in a way I'd never seen before. You're really leaving, he said. Not a question this time. A realization. I'm taking a break from being treated like I'm not good enough. I never said. You didn't have to say it. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. He moved aside to let me pass, but I stopped and turned to face him one more time. Let me ask you something, Christopher. In 3 years of marriage, have you ever asked me about a project I was working on? Have you ever come to one of my job sites to see what I do? Have you ever attended any of my industry events or award ceremonies? Have you ever shown genuine interest in my work beyond whether it interfered with your schedule or made you uncomfortable at your own events? He opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out. His face went pale as the question settled into him, forcing him to confront something he'd been avoiding. There were times I thought. He couldn't finish a sentence. Couldn't construct a defense that would hold up against the truth. That's what I thought, I said. I walked down the stairs and out the front door. Got into my car, my sensible, unglamorous Honda CR-V with blueprints in the back, and drove away from the house where I'd spent 3 years making myself smaller to fit into someone else's limited vision of who I should be. In my rearview mirror, I could see Christopher standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from inside. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Or maybe I just finally stopped seeing him as bigger than he actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Asterisk doors unlocked. Wine is breathing. Take your time. Asterisk. I drove through the quiet streets toward her apartment on the other side of town, and with each mile I felt something loosening in my chest. Something that had been clenched tight for longer than I'd realized. Not freedom exactly. Not yet. But the first breath before it. The beginning of understanding that I deserved more than someone who saw me as a project to manage rather than a person to know. The beginning of realizing that the problem had never been me. I pulled into Elena's parking lot 20 minutes later and sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick down into silence. My phone lit up with a text from Christopher. Asterisk, please come home. We need to talk about this. Asterisk. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my bag and walked up to Elena's apartment, where the door opened before I could knock and my best friend pulled me into a hug that felt like the first solid ground I'd stood on in years. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. Elena's apartment became my sanctuary for the next week. She'd cleared space in her closet without me asking, stocked her fridge with my favorite coffee creamer, and somehow knew exactly when I needed to talk and when I needed silence. The first night we sat on her couch with a bottle of wine between us and I told her everything. Not just about the dinner but about the 3 years leading up to it. All the small moments I'd dismissed or rationalized or explained away. He never knew you, she said on the third night, after I'd spent an hour analyzing whether I'd somehow contributed to the problem by not being more direct about my achievements. And the scary part is he never wanted to. Her words hit something deep and true. Christopher hadn't married me, he'd married the idea of me. Supportive wife. Pleasant accessory. Someone who wouldn't challenge him or overshadow him or require him to see past his own reflection. The actual person I was had been irrelevant to him all along. My phone became a source of constant stress during those first few days. Christopher's texts arrived like clockwork, each one a different flavor of the same desperation. Day 1, early morning. I'm sorry I reacted badly last night. Can we please talk about this? Day 1, evening. I know you're angry but we can work through this. Just come home. Day 2. You have to understand how shocking that was for me. Walking into that dinner and finding out my wife has this whole career I didn't know about. Can you see it from my perspective? Day 3 turned angry. You deliberately humiliated me in front of the most important people in my professional network. You let me look like a fool. That's not something a wife does to her husband. Day 4 swung back to apologetic. I love you. I don't want to lose you. Please just talk to me. I didn't respond to any of them. Just watched the messages come in, each one revealing more about who Christopher actually was when he didn't get what he wanted. Elena noticed me staring at my phone one evening and gently took it from my hands. You don't owe him a response. You don't owe him anything. I know. This feels strange. 3 years of marriage and it ends with me ignoring his texts from my best friend's couch. 3 years of marriage ended the moment he told you not to embarrass him, she corrected. This is just you recognizing it. He was right. The marriage had been over for a while. I'd just been too invested in making it work to see how broken it already was. On day 6, Christopher sent a longer message. I read it twice, feeling something shift as I absorbed the words. Asterisk Natalie, I've been thinking about everything that happened. I'm sorry for how I acted at the dinner. I was surprised and felt embarrassed, but that's not your fault. I realize now that I haven't been as supportive of your career as I should have been. I want to fix this. I want to understand what you do and be proud of you the way I should have been all along. Can we talk? Please? I love you and I don't want to lose you over this. Asterisk. I stared at the message for a long time. It said almost all the right things. The apology. The acknowledgement. The desire to change. But something was missing. He was sorry he'd been caught being unsupportive. Not sorry for the years of actual dismissal. He wanted to fix the embarrassment he'd felt, not repair the damage he'd caused to our relationship. He loved me, but which version? The real one he'd just discovered, or the manageable one he'd thought he married? The message was about preserving what he wanted, not about understanding what he'd done. I called him. He deserved to hear my voice when I ended our marriage. He answered on the first ring. Nat. Thank God. Can you come home? I miss you. We can work through this. I don't think we can, Christopher. Silence. Then cautiously, what do you mean? You don't respect what I do, I said, keeping my voice steady. You never have. You spent our entire marriage treating me like I was trying to be successful instead of recognizing I already was. And when you found out the truth, you weren't proud. You were humiliated. That tells me everything I need to know. That's not fair, I was just shocked. You were embarrassed, I corrected. There's a difference. You were embarrassed that your wife was more successful than you realized, that she had connections you didn't, that she didn't need you the way you needed her to need you. I never said. You didn't have to say it. You showed it every day for 3 years. I took a breath. You wanted a wife who looked good at events and supported your ambitions. I wanted a partner who valued my work as much as I valued theirs. We wanted different things. We still do. So what, you're just giving up? Just throwing away 3 years of marriage because of one bad night? And there was. He still thought the problem was the dinner. One isolated incident he could apologize for and move past. He didn't see the pattern. Didn't understand that the dinner had simply revealed what had always been true. I'm not giving up, I said quietly. I'm accepting reality. And the reality is I deserve someone who doesn't think I need to prove my worth to be worth loving. I never said you weren't worth, Natalie, that's not what this is about. It's exactly what this is about. And I think you know that. I think that's why you're so angry. He went silent. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel him searching for the right words that would make this go away. He couldn't find them. I'm going to file for divorce, I said. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Natalie, please. I ended the call. 2 weeks later I filed the papers. My attorney was efficient and sympathetic. The asset division would be straightforward. The house was mine from before the marriage, our bank accounts had always been separate, and Christopher had no claim to my business. What I didn't expect was how quickly the story would spread. Within a month, the tale of the husband who didn't know his wife was the architect everyone wanted to work with had become industry gossip. I heard different versions of it, some accurate, some embellished, told at conferences, shared over client dinners, passed around at networking events. People I'd never met knew the story. Some found it inspiring. Others found it hilarious. A few used it as a cautionary tale about assumptions and ego. My phone rang constantly with new project inquiries. People who'd been at the dinner wanted to work with me. People who'd heard about the dinner wanted to meet me. James Whitmore had apparently been sharing the story himself, framing it as an example of why he valued substance over image. The attention was flattering and overwhelming in equal measure. Meanwhile, Christopher's professional world was imploding in ways I heard about through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he tried to leverage his connection to Natalie to network with some of the guests from the dinner. Reached out to Michael Chin about investment opportunities, mentioned casually that his wife was the architect Chin had been so impressed by. James Whitmore had shut that down immediately. Made it clear to his network that Christopher was not affiliated with my firm, did not have professional access to me, and should not be representing himself as connected to my work. The message was unambiguous. Christopher had embarrassed himself, and attempting to profit from his wife's reputation would only make it worse. I heard through a former colleague that Christopher's firm had passed him over for the promotion he'd been expecting. The official reason was fit concerns and professional judgment issues. The unofficial reason, according to office gossip, was that he'd made a fool of himself in front of some of the firm's most important potential clients. Turns out embarrassing yourself in front of the region's most influential investors has consequences. I didn't take satisfaction in it exactly. Christopher's professional struggles weren't something I'd orchestrated or celebrated. But I didn't feel sorry for him either. He'd built his career on image and connections, on knowing the right people and saying the right things. When that foundation cracked, the whole structure became unstable. Meanwhile, my career, built on actual expertise and completed projects and relationships based on mutual respect, remained solid. The difference was stark enough to be its own lesson. Elena and I talked about it one evening over dinner at her place. I'd been staying there for 3 weeks by that point, and we'd fallen into an easy rhythm of coexistence. Do you think he'll be okay? She asked. Christopher, I mean. Professionally. I considered the question honestly. Eventually, probably. He's smart and capable when he's not trying so hard to impress people. Maybe this will teach him something. And personally, I thought about the texts that had finally stopped coming. About the divorce papers he'd signed without contest. About the marriage that had looked functional on the surface but had been hollow underneath. "I think he'll find someone who fits the image he wants," I said. "Someone who's happy being the supportive wife who doesn't challenge him. And maybe that'll make him happy." "But it wouldn't have made you happy." "No," I agreed. "It really wouldn't have." Elena raised her glass. "To knowing the difference." I clinked my glass against hers and smiled. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. The grief was still there. The loss of 3 years, the death of what I'd hoped the marriage could be. But underneath the grief was something stronger. Relief. And the quiet, growing certainty that I'd made the right choice. 3 months after I filed for divorce, I saw Christopher at my favorite coffee shop. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that the place was still quiet. I'd just ordered my usual when I spotted him sitting at a corner table, laptop open, looking like he belonged there. Our eyes met. He nodded, gave a small wave, then went back to his screen like it was the most natural thing in the world. I took my coffee and left without acknowledging him further. The next week I saw him again. Different day, same coffee shop, same corner table. This time he was on his phone, but he looked up when I walked in. Another small nod. Another pretense of casual coincidence. The third time I was walking back to my car after a site meeting near Elena's neighborhood and spotted his car parked across the street from her building. He was sitting in the driver's seat, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me notice him, he started the engine and drove away. That evening I texted him, "You need to stop showing up places I am. It's not coincidence anymore. It's deliberate." His response came 10 minutes later. "I live in this city too. I have a right to go wherever I want. You don't own these places." Technically true. Legally, I had no grounds to tell him where he could or couldn't be. But the pattern was becoming undeniable. Coffee shop. The street near my office. Outside Elena's building. Always just present enough to be noticed, never close enough to be called harassment. Watching. Waiting. Making sure I knew he was there. I told Elena about it that night over dinner. She listened with growing concern, her expression darkening as I described each incident. "That's not coincidence," she said firmly. "That's stalking behavior. You need to document every time you see him. He's not doing anything illegal. Not yet. But men who do this kind of thing escalate. Start keeping a record. Dates, times, locations. Just in case." I started the documentation that night, feeling uneasy about what it implied. That my marriage wasn't just ending, it was devolving into something uglier. Then the colleague calls started. First it was David, an architect I'd worked with on a municipal building restoration 2 years ago. "Hey Natalie, weird question, but did you ask Christopher to reach out to me? He called yesterday asking about that library project we did together. Wanted to know who the client was, what the budget was, whether you were still working with them." My stomach tightened. "No, I didn't ask him to contact you." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing." It felt off, so I said I couldn't discuss client information. He got kind of pushy about it though. Said he was just trying to understand your work better. 2 days later, my project coordinator mentioned that someone claiming to be my husband had called the office asking for our client roster. The receptionist had politely refused and transferred the call to our office manager, who told him firmly that we couldn't share that information without my explicit permission. Then Bryn, my assistant, pulled me aside one afternoon with an expression that told me this conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she started, closing my office door behind her. "But Christopher contacted our office yesterday. Called the main line and got transferred to me when he said it was about financial documents." "What kind of financial documents?" "That's the thing, he was vague about it. Said he needed to check on some records from when you were married. But then he started asking about ongoing contracts, client names, project values. He wanted to know about the Whitmore estate payment, about upcoming projects, about revenue projections." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I told him I couldn't share any of that without your direct permission. He got angry. Actually raised his voice. Said he had a legal right to information about assets that might be considered marital property." The words hit me like cold water. Marital property. He wasn't trying to understand my work or reconcile our relationship. He was building a case. I called my divorce attorney within the hour. "Natalie, I was actually about to call you," she said when she answered. "Christopher's attorney filed a motion this morning." He's claiming entitlement to a portion of your firm's value as a marital asset. I felt the floor shift beneath me. What? His argument is that your business grew significantly during your marriage. He's claiming that his emotional support and partnership enabled your success, and that he deserves compensation for his contribution to your career trajectory. Her tone was professional, but I could hear the underlying frustration. It's not uncommon in divorces where one spouse has a business, but in your case it's particularly absurd. Your firm was established years before you met him, and the growth is clearly attributable to your own expertise and reputation. So we can fight this, right? Absolutely. The claim has no real merit. But I need to warn you, this is going to get messy. He's not going to let this go easily. She paused. Men like Christopher don't handle rejection well. And they especially don't handle being outshone by women they thought were beneath them. He's going to make this as difficult and drawn out as he possibly can. What do I need to do? Document everything. Every contact he makes, every time he shows up somewhere he shouldn't be, every call to your office or colleagues. We need to build a pattern showing this isn't about legitimate financial interest. It's about control and retaliation. I hung up feeling sick. The divorce I'd hoped would be straightforward was turning into something uglier and more complicated than I'd anticipated. Then came the development I truly didn't see coming. I was at an industry networking event 2 weeks later. One of those evening mixers where architects and developers and preservation board members mingled over wine and appetizers. I'd almost skipped it, exhausted from dealing with Christopher's legal maneuvering, but James Whitmore had personally asked me to attend. He wanted to introduce me to someone interested in a theater restoration project. I was talking with the potential client when I spotted Christopher across the room. My first thought was confusion. Christopher had never attended these events when we were married. He'd always claimed they were boring, too niche, not relevant to his field. Then I saw the woman with him. She was young, mid-20s maybe, dressed professionally but trying slightly too hard. The kind of outfit that announced ambition. She was smiling up at Christopher like he was explaining something fascinating. His arm was around her waist in a casually possessive way. I recognized her. Rachel Morrison, junior project manager at Hendricks and Associates, a competing firm that specialized in commercial renovations. We'd been on opposite sides of a bid once. She'd seemed competent but inexperienced, eager to prove herself. Christopher spotted me looking and his expression shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Not embarrassment. Something closer to defiance. I excused myself from the conversation and found Elena, who'd come with me as moral support. "Is that Christopher?" she asked, following my gaze. "With Rachel Morrison from Hendricks. How long has that been going on?" "I have no idea. First I'm hearing of it." The next morning, a colleague sent me a screenshot from Christopher's social media. It was from the event. Christopher and Rachel smiling at the camera, his arm around her shoulders, both holding wine glasses. The caption read, "Great evening networking with the best in historic preservation. Always learning from this incredible community." I stared at the photo, pieces clicking into place. Christopher wasn't just dating Rachel. He was using her. Access to my industry. Entry to events he'd never cared about before. Information about projects and clients and firm strategies that he could potentially leverage. All wrapped in the appearance of a new relationship that made him seem connected and relevant. It was calculated, transparent to anyone paying attention. And apparently working. Over the next few weeks, I heard through various channels that Christopher had been showing up at Preservation Society meetings, architecture lectures, even a historic building tour that required pre-registration. Places he'd never had interest in when we were married. Always with Rachel. Always introducing himself as someone deeply connected to the preservation community. Always making sure people knew he understood the field, appreciated the work, had relationships with the key players. He was rebuilding his reputation through proximity to my world. The world he'd dismissed as unimportant for 3 years was suddenly his new professional identity. And Rachel, whether she realized it or not, was his access point. I mentioned it to my attorney during our next call. "That's actually helpful for our case," she said. "It shows his sudden interest in your field is strategic, not genuine. That he sees value in your professional connections and reputation, which undermines his claim that he didn't know or understand what you did during the marriage. Should I be worried about him getting information through Rachel?" About my projects or clients. Document anything suspicious but don't assume the worst. She might have no idea she's being used. Or she might be smarter than he thinks and keeping appropriate professional boundaries. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Christopher's campaign was just beginning. That the legal motion and the sudden industry involvement and the strategic relationship were all pieces of something larger. He'd spent 3 years underestimating me. Now he knew exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished. And instead of accepting defeat gracefully, he was positioning himself to claim credit for it. Or failing that, to tear it down. I drove home from that conversation feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Genuine fear. Not of physical danger, but of what someone with wounded pride and strategic intelligence could do when they decided revenge mattered more than dignity. Christopher had always been good at playing the long game. Calculating moves several steps ahead. I just hadn't realized I'd become his opponent. The invitation to the Regional Preservation Awards arrived 6 weeks after I discovered Christopher's campaign. I'd been nominated for the Whitmore Estate restoration, the same project that had detonated my marriage 4 months earlier. The irony was almost poetic. The building Christopher had told me not to embarrass him, it was now the reason I was being honored by the preservation community. Elena insisted on coming with me as my +1. "You're not facing that room alone," she said firmly when I mentioned the event. "And if Christopher shows up, I want to be there to watch his face when you win." "I might not win." "You're going to win," she said with absolute certainty. "And you're going to look amazing doing it." The ceremony was held at the historic Grandview Hotel, a beautifully restored property from the 1920s. The ballroom was filled with architects, developers, preservation board members, and city officials, basically everyone who mattered in the regional historic preservation world. I wore a deep blue dress that Elena had helped me pick out, something elegant and confident without trying too hard. My hair was styled professionally, jewelry understated. When I looked in the mirror before we left, I saw someone who belonged in that room. Someone who'd earned her place there. We arrived early and I immediately started recognizing faces. Colleagues I'd worked with. Clients from past projects. James Whitmore, who waved from across the room and started making his way over to greet us. Then I saw Christopher. He was standing near the bar with Rachel, both of them dressed for the occasion. His suit was new, I didn't recognize it. Rachel wore a cocktail dress that was slightly too formal for the event, like she'd misjudged the dress code. Elena followed my gaze and her grip on my arm tightened. Deep breath. "You're here because you earned it. He's here because he's trying to stay relevant." "I know. Do you want to leave?" "Absolutely not." James reached us before I could overthink Christopher's presence. He greeted me warmly, congratulated me on the nomination, introduced Elena to a developer he'd been talking with. Within minutes I was absorbed into conversations about upcoming projects and preservation challenges, the kind of substantive professional discussions that reminded me why I loved this work. I saw Christopher watching from across the room but refused to let it affect me. When they called everyone to be seated for dinner and the awards presentation, Elena and I found our assigned table near the front. James was seated at the same table along with 2 board members from the Preservation Society and their spouses. Christopher and Rachel were seated toward the back. The dinner passed in a blur of courses and conversations. My stomach was too tight with nerves to eat much, but I smiled and engaged and pretended I wasn't counting down the minutes until they announced the restoration category. Finally, the awards began. They started with smaller categories: Best Adaptive Reuse under $1 million, Best Preservation Planning Document, Outstanding Volunteer Contribution. Each winner gave a brief speech, thanked their teams, posed for photos. Then came the category I'd been nominated for: Excellence in Historic Building Restoration. The presenter read through the nominees, describing each project briefly. When she got to the Whitmore estate, she spent extra time on it, highlighting the complexity, the innovative solutions to preservation challenges, the ahead-of-schedule completion. And the winner is Natalie Harper for the Whitmore Estate Restoration. The room erupted in applause. Elena grabbed my hand and squeezed. James was already standing to hug me. I rose from my seat, legs somehow steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system, and walked to the stage. The award was heavier than I expected. A crystal piece mounted on wood, beautifully engraved. I stood at the podium looking out at the ballroom full of people and felt something shift inside me. I was done being quiet. Done shrieking myself. Done letting anyone make me feel like my accomplishments needed to be hidden or apologized for. Thank you, I began, my voice clear and strong. This award represents 15 years of work that not everyone valued or understood. I saw Christopher in the back of the room, his posture rigid. There were people in my life who saw my dedication to historic preservation as an inconvenience rather than a calling. Who thought that showing up to job sites in work boots meant I wasn't successful. Who told me not to embarrass them in front of important people, not realizing those important people were calling me for advice. I didn't say his name. Didn't point. Didn't need to. Half the room knew the story. I could see recognition dawning on faces, could see people glancing toward the back where Christopher sat. His face had gone deep red. Rachel looked confused, uncomfortable, like she was starting to piece together something she didn't like. This award belongs to everyone who's ever been underestimated, I continued. To everyone who's been told they're not enough or too much or somehow wrong for being exactly who they are. We don't need others to recognize our worth. We just need to keep doing work that matters. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet. Elena was crying. James was beaming with pride. I left the stage with the award in my hands and my head held high, feeling lighter than I had in years. After the ceremony ended, people swarmed to congratulate me. I shook hands, accepted compliments, posed for photos. The conversations blurred together in a warm haze of validation and professional respect. I was talking with a developer about a potential project when I felt a hand on my arm. Christopher. We need to talk, he said tightly. Elena materialized at my other side. No, you really don't. This doesn't concern you, Christopher said to her, not taking his eyes off me. Actually, it does. Natalie asked me to be here specifically so she wouldn't have to deal with you alone. I gently touched Elena's arm. It's okay. I'll handle this. She gave Christopher a look that could have stripped paint, then stepped back, but not far. Christopher steered me toward the coat check area, slightly away from the crowd. Rachel trailed behind us, looking increasingly distressed. That speech was a cheap shot, Christopher said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You purposely humiliated me in front of everyone. Again. I looked at him with a calm I'd earned through months of therapy and painful self-reflection. I didn't mention your name, Christopher. If you felt humiliated, that's your conscience recognizing truth. You made it obvious. I told my story. If it makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's something you should examine. He stepped closer and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. You've been trying to destroy my reputation since the divorce. Suddenly James Whitmore was there, positioning himself subtly between us. Is there a problem here? Christopher's face went pale. His anger deflated like a punctured balloon as he registered who just interrupted. No problem, Christopher said stiffly, taking a step back. I was just congratulating my ex-wife on her award. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Natalie's earned every recognition she's received. Her talent speaks for itself. Always has. He turned to me. Rebecca Hartford is looking for you. She wants to discuss that theater project. It was a clear dismissal. I nodded gratefully and started to turn away. Natalie, Christopher started. But Rachel suddenly spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. I need to use the restroom. Excuse me. She walked away quickly, heading toward the hallway where the restrooms were located. I followed a moment later, wanting to escape the confrontation, and found myself in the quiet of the ladies' room washing my hands when Rachel emerged from a stall. Our eyes met in the mirror. She looked shaken. Almost tearful. Can I talk to you for a minute? I dried my hands slowly. Okay. I need to tell you something. She took a breath, steadying herself. Christopher's been using me. I didn't see it at first, but tonight made it obvious. Rachel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you deserve to know. She leaned against the counter. He asked me out right after your divorce was filed. Said he wanted to stay connected to the architecture community, that he'd always been interested in preservation but never had time to explore it during his marriage. It seems sweet. Genuine. I waited, saying nothing. But he's been asking me about your firm's projects. Trying to get information about clients you're working with, upcoming bids, strategy meetings. I thought he was just curious, trying to understand the field better. But tonight after your speech, she swallowed hard. He said you'd always been a manipulative person who got lucky. That you deliberately humiliated him to advance your own career. That he was going to make sure you paid for what you'd done to his reputation. The words hung in the air between us. I thought you should know what he's really like, Rachel continued. I'm done being part of whatever game he's playing. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I looked at this young woman who'd been caught in the crossfire of my failing marriage, and felt genuine sympathy for her. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. And I'm sorry you got pulled into this. I should have known better. She managed a weak smile. Lesson learned, I guess. She left the restroom and I stood there for a moment processing what I'd just heard. Then I pulled out my phone and texted my attorney. Need to talk tomorrow morning. Have new information about Christopher's behavior. Rachel Morrison willing to provide statement. The response came within seconds. Perfect. This might be exactly what we need to end his legal nonsense. I walked back out to the ballroom, found Elena, and quietly told her what had happened. So Rachel's finally figured out she's being used, Elena said. Good for her. Better late than never. Her statement could end Christopher's claim to my business. Then tomorrow's going to be a very good day. I looked across the ballroom one last time and saw Christopher standing alone near the exit, Rachel nowhere in sight. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Or maybe I just finally stopped seeing him as larger than he actually was. The morning after the awards ceremony, I met with my attorney armed with Rachel's willingness to provide a statement. We sat in her office with coffee and legal pads, and I recounted everything Rachel had told me. The timeline of Christopher's pursuit. His questions about my projects and clients. The comments he'd made after my acceptance speech. This is exactly what we needed, my attorney said, making notes. It establishes a clear pattern of strategic manipulation. He wasn't a supportive spouse contributing to your success. He was actively dismissive of your work until he saw an opportunity to exploit it for his own benefit. Rachel came in later that afternoon and gave her statement. She was nervous but resolute, detailing every conversation where Christopher had steered the topic toward my firm, every question about clients and contracts, every attempt to position himself as connected to my professional world. I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner, she said as she signed the affidavit. But I want to make it right. You're doing the right thing now, my attorney assured her. That's what matters. 2 weeks later we presented everything to the judge handling our divorce case. Rachel's sworn statement. Documentation from my assistant about Christopher's calls to the office. The pattern of him showing up at places I frequented. His sudden involvement in preservation industry events he'd never attended during our marriage. My attorney laid it out methodically. Mr. Bennett is claiming he supported Mrs. Harper's career and deserves compensation for that support. The evidence shows the opposite. He dismissed her work, showed no interest in her projects, and actively discouraged her professional development. His current actions demonstrate that his motion isn't about fair asset division. It's retaliation for being publicly revealed as someone who underestimated his wife. The judge reviewed the materials, asked a few clarifying questions, then made her ruling. Christopher's motion was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't refile it. His attorney was advised that continuing this line of argument would be considered harassment and could result in sanctions. The divorce would proceed as originally proposed. Split of marital assets acquired during our marriage, but no claim to my firm or its growth. Christopher's attorney advised him to accept the settlement. He signed the papers without further contest. 6 months after I'd walked out of our house with a single bag, the divorce was finalized. I never spoke to Christopher again. The dissolution of my marriage opened up space for my career to expand in ways I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. The 4 projects I'd connected with at that dinner all moved forward. The textile mill conversion became one of my firm's most challenging and rewarding projects, transforming industrial space into residential lofts while preserving the original brick and timber structure. The theater restoration won us another award and led to 2 more similar projects. The historic hotel renovation brought us regional recognition. The mixed-use development in the Landmark District established us as the go-to firm for complex preservation work. I hired 3 new architects within 8 months. All of them were talented, passionate about preservation, and brought perspectives that strengthened our work. I promoted Bryn to senior project manager and she thrived in the role. We moved into a larger office space in a restored 1920s building downtown. The irony of housing a preservation firm in a preserved building wasn't lost on me. Our work environment became a testament to what we valued. Original wood floors, exposed brick, period details maintained alongside modern functionality. I won 2 more awards that year. Got featured in a national architecture magazine in an article about women leading the preservation movement. Was invited to give a keynote speech at a regional conference where I talked about the intersection of historical integrity and modern sustainability. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I enjoyed my success without filtering it through someone else's insecurity. Without wondering if I was being too proud or too visible or too much. I was just enough. Exactly as I was. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, James Whitmore invited me to another dinner at his estate. This one was smaller, more intimate, just a handful of preservationists, architects, and developers discussing a collaborative waterfront revitalization project. The city wanted to transform a deteriorating industrial corridor into a mixed-use district while maintaining the area's historic character. It was the kind of complex, multi-phase project that required coordination between multiple firms and specialties. That's where I met Daniel. He was a structural engineer specializing in historic buildings, brought in to consult on seismic retrofitting for the older warehouses along the waterfront. We ended up sitting next to each other at dinner, and within 5 minutes we were deep in conversation about a Victorian-era building that needed earthquake reinforcement without destroying its architectural character. The challenge is integrating modern structural support into buildings that weren't designed for it, he said, gesturing with his wine glass. You can't just bolt steel frames to brick walls and call it done. You have to understand how the original structure works, what's carrying load, where you can intervene without compromising integrity. Exactly, I said, feeling that spark of connection that comes from talking with someone who genuinely gets it. It's the same with restoration. You're not just fixing what's broken. You're understanding the original intent and honoring it while making the building functional for contemporary use. When someone mentioned I'd done the Whitmore estate restoration, Daniel's face lit up with genuine interest. That ballroom ceiling work was incredible, he said. How did you match the plaster composition to the original? And the load-bearing modifications you made to support the chandelier without damaging the roof structure. I've been recommending people study that project. Not, wow, you did that? Or, I'm impressed. Just specific technical curiosity about the work itself. We talked through most of the dinner. About projects we'd worked on, challenges we'd solved, the satisfaction of preserving something beautiful while making it safe and functional. About the frustration of building codes that didn't account for historic structures, and the creativity required to find solutions that satisfied both preservation standards and modern safety requirements. 3 weeks later we met for coffee. That turned into dinner. Then a weekend hike where we spent 4 hours talking about everything and nothing. Daniel came to my job sites without being asked, genuinely interested in seeing the work in progress. He attended an awards ceremony where I received recognition for the textile mill project, and afterward asked detailed questions about the structural challenges we'd faced. When I talked about projects, he listened, not with polite attention but with real engagement. He treated me like a partner, not an accessory. 4 months into dating, I knew I'd found something different. Something real. We were having dinner at his place when he asked, "Have you ever thought about what you want long-term? In a relationship, I mean." I considered the question honestly. I want someone who sees me, who values what I do not because it's impressive, but because they understand why it matters. Someone who doesn't need me to be smaller or quieter or different than I am. That seems like a pretty reasonable baseline, Daniel said. Not something you should have to ask for. You think so? But my marriage taught me that not everyone sees it that way. He reached across the table and took my hand. Your ex-husband was an idiot. I laughed. That's becoming increasingly clear. I mean it. You're brilliant at what you do. Passionate about it. Successful in ways most people only dream about. And he made you feel like that was something to apologize for. Daniel shook his head. His loss. Completely. It was the simplest statement, but it settled into me like truth I'd been waiting to hear from someone who actually meant it. A year after that dinner that changed everything, I ran into Christopher one last time. I was grabbing coffee before a client meeting when I saw him at a corner table. Alone, looking tired, wearing a suit that seemed slightly too big for him, like he'd lost weight and hadn't adjusted his wardrobe yet. Our eyes met. His face cycled through emotions I recognized from our final conversations: surprise, discomfort, residual anger, something that might have been regret. "Natalie," he said, standing awkwardly. "How are you?" "Good," I said and meant it. "Really good." "How are you?" "Fine. Busy. I'm actually at a different firm now. Corporate restructuring division. Different focus than before." "That's good. I hope it's working out." "It is. Mostly." Awkward pause. "I heard you won another award. For that mill project. Congratulations." "Thank you." We stood there in uncomfortable silence, two people who'd once been married now struggling to make basic small talk. Are you seeing anyone?" he asked. "I am. His name is Daniel. He's a structural engineer." Christopher nodded, processing that. "That's good. I'm glad you're happy. Are you seeing anyone?" "Not right now. Work's been demanding. Haven't had much time for dating." I wondered if that was true or if Rachel had been his last attempt at using relationships strategically and it had backfired badly enough to make him cautious. "Well," I said, "I should get going. Client meeting." "Right. Of course." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Natalie, I'm sorry. For all of it. The way I treated you during our marriage. The legal stuff after. All of it. You deserved better." I looked at him and realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a distant sadness for the years we'd both wasted trying to make something work that was never going to. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Christopher." "I really do." And I meant it. Because the best revenge wasn't his failure or my success. It wasn't the awards or the recognition or even the moment at that first dinner when everything he'd assumed about me crumbled. The best revenge was building a life where I didn't need revenge at all. Where I could show up exactly as I was, work boots and messy bun and hard-earned expertise, and know that was more than enough. Where I had work I was proud of, a partner who saw me clearly, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that my worth had never depended on someone else recognizing it. I walked out of that coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun, got into my sensible Honda CR-V with blueprints in the back, and drove to my client meeting feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Dinner tonight? Want to hear how the meeting goes?" I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely. Okay." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, my future felt like something I was building for myself, not something I was fitting myself into. That was worth more than any revenge could ever be. If this story of hidden success and public vindication had you cheering, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when James walked right past Christopher to greet Natalie at that dinner. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.